Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 10th of July, 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen. I think we got the lower third right this time.
You did.
Are you okay? Good stuff. And we've got Vanessa Beeley joining us via video link, so look forward to that. But we're going to get straight on here, Patrick, and talk about the G20, because apparently Putin and Trump have done it at last.
They've done it. They've pressed the flesh at last. It's the most anticipated meeting of two heads of state as long as we can possibly remember. And it seems like, as we discussed yesterday, the forces of the political universe and the establishments on many continents were trying to keep these two forces from getting together. And they finally did it here in Hamburg over the weekend, Mike. And by all accounts, we'd say it's a successful meeting. A lot of positive things have come out of this. Obviously, we're cautiously optimistic about anything with regards to Donald Trump and the United States, whose foreign policy right now seems to be meandering all over the place. Nobody quite knows what it is or where it's heading. But certainly, we're hoping that Vladimir Putin will be a good influence on the American president in terms of stability and skillful statesmanship.
Absolutely. So the first thing to note was that it was supposed to be a 35-minute meeting. It lasted 2.5 hours. They had a couple of meetings during the day. But Pat, let's first of all just have a look at what some of the mainstream media has been saying about this. So CNN says Donald Trump puts US in a club of one. Well, Patrick, it seems to me that if what's going on here is as it appears, Trump appears to be perhaps reconsidering the US position, perhaps realigning a little bit closer to Russia and China, maybe. So what does that headline actually mean? That means that we're really concerned about the possibility that that's what he's doing. And therefore, we are going to present this as being isolationist policy, when in fact, bearing in mind what's going on with the Silk Road project, what he seems to be doing is shaking hands with probably 2/3 of the planet.
Sure. CNN's concerned that there's a danger that this White House might actually be having good bilateral relations with the two world superpowers, China and Russia, and we can't have that now, can we? But CNN's just got a running vendetta against Donald Trump, and they're still a bit bitter from the elections. And at the same time, they're trying to find a way to pull back from the sort of the running hoax, which has been Russiagate, and Russia hacking the U.S. election. So CNN's having a difficult time finding how to actually back out of such a large parking space, Mike.
Well, it doesn't look like the mainstream media in the States intends to do that, because this is the LA Times. Putin thinks Trump believed him on the election issue. Now, Tillerson said that he was shocked about the way that Trump had addressed this issue with Putin, in the sense that he went straight in with both feet, sort of thing. But clearly, mainstream media in the States are not going to let this one drop.
No. The LA Times will probably be the most sort of caustic, liberal, progressive broadsheet newspaper in the United States, probably out of all of them. So no surprise there. And so what they're, again, trying to do is that it seems like the American Democratic Party is very much lost, as Bernie Sanders announced recently. They've totally lost the plot, and so the only thing that's really left in terms of opposition is just trying to drive wedge issues with regards to this president and foreign policy. And it's, as you can see, Mike, it's not a very successful strategy for the opposition in the U.S. So who knows, when will they abandon this? Finally, we'll wait and see.
And UK media can't be left out of this, because they're wanting to get a boot in as well. And this is a Telegraph saying Donald Trump's cruel offer to Charlie Gard is virtue signaling on an intercontinental scale.
Yes, one must be wary of the dangers of virtue signaling, Mike. It seems like everybody's at it these days. But, there's really nothing wrong with Donald Trump wanting to make what seems to be a humanitarian gesture to somebody, a family in need, and who knows, they might actually get a check delivered to do this operation that supposedly will save this child's life. We can't see, but what's really more disturbing, Mike, is that the media will use this child as a political football.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're seeing right here. That's actually quite low.
Yeah.
Is as if the media can't go any lower. They always find new ways to surprise us.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Well, let's look at what did happen at the press conference then.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. President Putin and I have been discussing various things, and I think it's going very well. We've had some very, very good talks. We're going to have a talk now, and obviously that will continue. But we look forward to a lot of very positive things happening for Russia, for the United States, and for everybody concerned. And it's an honor to be with you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
And I think the thing to note there, Patrick, was the handshake.
The handshake. It's too bad we don't have a screenshot, but you'll notice whenever Donald Trump goes to shake hands, he always, two things. He moves in first with his hand first, and he'll always have his palm facing up. And you'll notice that every single time, right back through the campaign and on every instance. So what he's doing in terms of basic body language is Donald Trump is signaling that he is not threatening and that he is not obsessed with being in control. If he did, he would have the palm facing down as standard body language orthodoxy dictates. And you'll see Trump will always do that. It's very interesting to watch this man's body language. It's the language of big business, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what was agreed then? Well, one thing that was agreed was over Ukraine. Russia asked that a special channel, you might call it that, be opened to resolve the differences on Ukraine. And so Trump has appointed an ambassador to serve as the U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations. This is Kurt Volker. So that was announced, as you can see on screen there, on the security, Department of State website a couple of days ago. They also were discussing North Korea. They were discussing terrorism. They were discussing cybersecurity. But before we mention cybersecurity, let's just have a look at who Kurt Volker is, because it seems, Patrick, that Trump is appointing people that perhaps aren't of the best caliber, shall we say, because here is Kurt Volker associated with the McCain Institute. So this isn't a man of peace, perhaps? Well,
he's the executive, I believe the executive director of the John McCain Institute for leadership, international leadership. So who is Kurt Volker? He's also on the board, I believe, of the American-Hungarian Foundation, who knows exactly what that foundation based in Washington, D.C. does. But so this is a deep state operator. This is who Kurt Volker is. The deep state pedigree of this man is absolutely unimpeachable. He is from the establishment, and he's one of these individuals that will float through administrations, through different power changes. People like this will always be there in the background. Incredible ties to Wall Street. Incredible, and he himself is on the board, or has been on the board of a couple of major funds and trusts based in Wall Street. So this is a major operator here. So while we say that there's a lot of positive things to come out of here from this G20, Trump clearly has difficulty finding people that are not linked back to the deep state. Yeah, that's hard. I think Donald Trump is understanding that the swamp, which is Washington, D.C., that he was supposed to be draining, actually provides life for so many of his associates as well. And so I think it's going to be impossible to ever drain the swamp because they're so entrenched. All his business associates' ties internationally, it's all meshed. I think this is by design. Yeah. This is how, when you look at this term deep state, this is what we're talking about, a completely meshed corporate and political entity where people have dual relationships and loyalties as well. So this will be very, very difficult to avoid any of those connections. On the cybersecurity issue, Patrick, they agreed to set up a working group to work on cybersecurity. Lavrov made a very interesting comment because he said that the issue of cybersecurity has at its root pornography and pedophilia. Now, I know that Western mainstream media would have us all believe that most of the cyber attacks are coming from Russia. But the truth is it not that most of these cyber attacks are coming from
Western intelligence agencies or via Western intelligence agencies. And so I just wonder whether that comment from Lavrov, particularly singling out pedophilia as being at the heart of the cyber security business and cybersecurity, cyber attacks, he's hinting at an awareness of what lies at the heart of Western governments.
Blackmail, perhaps, coercion, all these things in dark vice sort of areas. So that's an interesting comment. It's not a throwaway comment by Lavrov. That's absolutely targeted.
What was Tillerson's response to the meeting then? Because he was at the meeting, of course. He said that it was an extraordinarily important meeting between the two heads of state. He said there was a clear positive chemistry between the two. The positive thing I observed, he said, and I've had many meetings with President Putin before, is that there was not a lot of relitigating of the past. I think both the leaders feel that there's a lot of the past that both are unhappy about. The perspective of both of them is that this very important relationship, two of the largest nuclear powers of the world, we simply have to find a way to move forward. So even Tillerson presenting a positive position on this.
Yeah, I think with people like Rex Tillerson, like Donald Trump has no real experience in politics, has a lot of experience in business. He'll tend to make really good, coherent, rational statements that make a lot of sense, that do ring a bell with a lot of people out there who are in the common sense category. But then the pressure of the civil service, if you will, or those people who really run the country and who run the machine that is the United States Incorporated, will come in, and you'll see Tillerson, after pressure has been applied on him, on his company, on his associates, and you'll see a reversal of his statements. I don't know how he flip-flops on Assad with Syria every sort of week. He'll say Assad can stay, then the next day say Assad has to go, then the next day it'll be something different, and so forth. And so we'll see how this goes, if there's any continuity in any of these statements.
Yep. Okay. Well, this gives us an opportunity to bring Vanessa in at this point, because one of the things that also came out from the G20 was this US-Russian ceasefire deal. Reuters here reporting that it's already in place and it is holding in southwest Syria. Now, many people, Vanessa, are cynical about this in the sense that many people saying that every time the Western-backed opposition stroke terrorist groups come under real pressure, the US rolls out a plan for a ceasefire and attempts to agree a plan for a ceasefire. Is that how you see this this agreement? Is that a fair? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think I think one of the positives that we can perhaps take from it is that it might free up some of the Syrian army, if the ceasefire is genuine, to focus their efforts on the liberation of Deir ez-Zor from ISIS. That's one positive that has been posited to me by Syrians, actually, by Kevork Almassian. The other side of it, which is kind of extraordinary, is that apparently Israel is not beholden to this ceasefire. Now, this is kind of this is a demonstration of who is really controlling, I believe, the negotiations for that southern region, which of course incorporates the much contested Golan Heights, which were annexed by Israel illegally, of course. And we know that Israel has been basically supporting what are effectively its custodial guardians of the Golan Heights, which are the US-backed terrorist factions, but also the Israeli-treated and the Israeli-supported US-backed terrorist factions. So we've seen effectively those terrorist factions alerting Israel to Syrian Arab Army advances, and we've seen Israel return fire on their behalf. So, you know, the danger is that I think we might see a provocation which Israel responds to because it's not beholden to the ceasefire agreement, and it will call self-defense. It will say that the Syrian Arab Army has violated the ceasefire and use that as an excuse to either bomb or to shell the Syrian Arab Army positions. So this, for me, is the biggest risk of this particular safe zone.
And just to back up what Vanessa said, Vanessa, only a few weeks ago, I think a piece of shrapnel or debris fell into Israeli territory, and Israel basically claimed that was a violation, egregious violation of their own airspace or national security. Doesn't that really back up your sort of concerns there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was Moon of Alabama that did an excellent article pointing out the fact that there was a sequence of events where the terrorist factions had actually fired shells into either the no man's land on the border or actually into empty countryside on the Israeli side in order, as I said, to draw the Israeli fire at the Syrian Arab Army. In other words, as you've just described, a violation or a provocation. But those provocations are coming from the US-backed terrorists. They're not coming from the Syrian Arab Army.
Yeah, I think Adam Gary made a great point yesterday on the Sunday Wire. He said that Israel often will act against the interests of its so-called allies as well as those that it considers to be enemies. And they do this on a regular basis, and they usually do it and justify it under sort of their own security or their right to defend themselves or something like this. This is the problem with entering into any bilateral deal with a country like Israel. Has an absolutely horrible record with in terms of abiding by any agreements, let alone international law or any UN resolution. You're dealing with a rogue state, Mike. Yeah. Essentially.
Okay. Well, look, Vanessa, let's move on, and we'll start off with a tweet. And the tweet says #UK and #Netherlands are sponsoring and funding the Syrian opposition, in inverted commas. Even the tulips in #Netherlands are being watered with our blood. Now, who has sent you this tweet?
Well, this information was passed on to me by Ali Murad, who's a journalist who was actually tweeting in response to Maitem. Maitem is a very well-known Syrian commentator on Twitter. And of course, what they're referring to here is a firm called Independent Diplomat that was set up in 2004 by Karen Ross, a British diplomat. And basically what it says on the Independent Diplomat website, Independent Diplomat was founded in 2004 by former British diplomat Karen Ross. It's an innovative venture in the world of international relations. Staff comprises of experienced former diplomats. Their advice and strategic counsel provides their clients, mainly those that struggle to be heard, with the tools to navigate the often closed world of diplomacy. Karen Ross is an interesting character. He appeared in John Pilger's The War You Don't See. He's a former British diplomat, as we mentioned, who resigned over the Iraq War, and has been hired by Syrian rebels who want his advice on how to raise their voice on the world stage. He actually works for or reports to the Syrian Support Group, the National Coalition of Syrian Revolution and Opposition Forces, has enlisted independent diplomat in New York to update the United Nations Security Council, US government, and European Union on developments in its efforts to overthrow Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. If we go back to what was actually supplied to me by Ali Murad, was a FARA declaration.
So who is FARA? Who is FARA, Vanessa?
FARA are the Foreign Agents Registration Act organization.
So this is a US body.
Yeah.
It's a US a body which controls any donations coming in from a foreign government to an organization. In other words, to determine to what extent that organization is being politically influenced by those donations.
Okay, so this is the front page of a typical donation form, and this one is for the organization you're talking about.
Yep.
And the interesting part of this comes at the financial section towards the back. And this is received by FARA registration unit on the 6th of this will be US date, so this is the 1st of June 2016. And it appears to show significant funding, totaling almost $900,000 from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office.
Yeah, absolutely. What it basically shows, and we've actually received the FARAs from Ali Murad since 2013, and what it shows.
Well, we'll show some of the other ones in a minute.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. We'll show some of the other ones in a minute. Yeah. But go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, but basically, what it demonstrates is that particularly at this stage, so around September 2016 or throughout 2016, money was coming in from the British, the UK Foreign Office, Conflict, Stability and Security Fund into independent diplomat. And we know that that money was basically then put into enabling the visas for the white helmets to come to the United States. Now, a very important point to make here is the member of the white helmets whose visa was facilitated by independent diplomat, and then his speaking tour was also organized by independent diplomat. We assume with the money from the CSSF, was Raed Saleh. Now, in April 2016, Saleh was deported from the United States based upon his extremist connections, which was a statement made by the United States State Department. So in September, this organization, Independent Diplomat, with money from the UK Foreign Office Conflict, Stability and Security Fund, brought a suspected extremist or a suspected terrorist into the United States. So one has to question what the CSSF funds are being used for. Are they being used to basically give a platform to a known terrorist, to a known extremist in the United States? The white helmets, we've been demonstrating, you know, on an increasing basis, their affiliation with Al-Qaeda or potentially even the blurring of the lines between the white helmets and Al-Qaeda. So effectively, under the UK Terrorism Act, the UK government is funding the promotion and platforming of terrorism.
Absolutely. Now, the Conflict, Stability and Security Fund, there was an inquiry launched some time ago because this fund is around £1 billion in total.
Yeah, it's actually more than that. I think it's just over £1 billion now. I mean, the way they describe it, it's a pool of money, of taxpayers' money. I have to also emphasize that. It's £1 billion+ per year for tackling conflict and instability overseas. Now, quite what organizing a white helmet speaking tour, how that constitutes tackling conflict and instability overseas when actually the white helmets are responsible for the majority of the propaganda that is maintaining the conflict inside Syria. Yeah. And yeah, there was a joint committee on national security strategy in 2016-17 where it states quite clearly that the objectives, operation and achievements of the CSSF are opaque. No central source of information exists to explain how it works, the criteria on which programs and projects are funded, the impact of CSSF-derived activity, and who has responsibility for the fund's management. So clearly, this is not a transparent fund. And in fact, The Guardian produced 2 articles accusing Amber Rudd of this secret conflict, stability and security fund, and the fact that she wasn't able to produce information or to show clear transparency on the use of the funds.
Just going back to the About Us page there for a second, they say we recruit, train and deploy qualified and experienced civilian experts to support UK government activities in fragile and conflict-affected states and to multilateral missions. Where the repositories, we're responsible for the safety and security of all staff deployed through us. Well, that's fine. But so they're taking civilian, what they describe as experts, to support UK government activities.
Yeah.
What is going on there?
Well, let's just look a tiny bit more in detail at Con Ross, who set up this independent diplomat. First of all, he claims that we're not lobbyists, we're an advisory group. But actually, his point man on Syria, Reza Afshar, who appeared on a Newsnight debate with Peter Ford, and who, by the way, was awarded an OBE in 2012 for his work as lead negotiator on Libya in the UN Security Council. And this work culminated in authorization for NATO's military action in 2011. So basically, effectively, he was a lobbyist for the NATO bombing and reduction of Libya to a failed state, and the deaths of millions inside Libya. So he's clearly a lobbyist. The fact that Con Ross is working, is directly reporting to the Syrian support group is clearly lobbying. His his talks that he organizes, for example, the White Helmet, the Siege of Aleppo talk, is clearly partisan towards the Syrian US-backed extremist opposition. He organized another talk on January the 25th, 2017, where he's demanding Syrian NGOs ask UN investigators to expose Russian and Iranian, actually, war crimes in Aleppo, again using the White Helmet. But there is no mention of the terrorist and extremist war crimes that are being carried out on a daily basis in Syria. So this is a very clear partisan organization that is lobbying, clearly lobbying. He consistently and systematically lobbies for intervention in Syria and military escalation. He also, if we look at the Farah forms, one of his main contacts is a guy called Munir Ibrahim. Now, if we look at Munir in 2012, he was a deputy to US Ambassador to Syria, Robert Ford, who we know fomented in the early days or incited the opposition. He armed the death squads, basically, again. He armed the Free Syrian Army, despite its clear connections to al-Qaeda, which actually Robert Ford admitted in one of his own tweets later on. So, all of the people who are involved in this organization, an independent diplomat, are clear lobbyists for military intervention and escalation of military action against Syria.
There's another organization involved in this, Crisis Action.
Yeah. Crisis Action is a very, very interesting organization. Now, this actually connects into the Joe Cox Fund, which, of course, as we know, was set up almost immediately hours after her death by 4 individuals. Now, one of those individuals is Gemma Mortensen of Change.org. But prior to being Change.org, she was the executive director of Crisis Action. Now, Crisis Action is basically an international alleged non-profit established to increase the effectiveness of civil society responses to armed conflict. So, in one sentence, that says very clearly what they do. In a speech that Gemma Mortensen gave in 2013 when she won the Skoll Award, she basically started the speech, when David walks into that room to fight Goliath, he stands a fighting chance with Crisis Action. We provide a powerful catapult, coordinated events, we help choreograph it all, working behind the scenes, peppering the media with credible voices. I mean, this couldn't be a clearer statement of intervention, infiltration via civil society, and the fomenting of anti-Syrian state sentiment, and then of course the amplifying of the voices of those anti-Syrian state actors and entities on the ground inside Syria, the majority of which, of course, we now know are US-funded and armed terrorist and extremist factions. So, and Gemma Mortensen, as I say, was one of the founders of the Joe Cox Fund. So again, a founder of a fund that was raising money for the White Helmets.
And we can't forget, of course, that one of her colleagues, her previous colleagues at that organization was Brendan Cox.
Absolutely, yeah. Her predecessor, as she says at the Skoll Award ceremony, was Brendan Cox. But also, I think what is very interesting is if we look at the Crisis Action funders, we have very familiar figures in there. We have Open Society Foundation, Soros, we have the Ford Foundation. They're associated with Ken Roth of Human Rights Watch, with Amnesty International, all of whom have been working towards the destabilization of Syria.
And it doesn't really matter which direction we look at this point, Vanessa and Patrick, because it's the same organizations, the same individuals that are pushing this through a real web of NGOs and other organizations, and yet mainstream media doesn't want to go near this.
No, I think what's really, this looks like a complete setup, Mike. So you have Karen Ross, who made some dramatic resignation because of the Iraq War. That probably gives him a lot of credibility from the political left, possibly even elements of the maybe anti-war movement. And then he moves into this Foreign Office funded position. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, but this is really interesting because I've not had much time to actually look into the Chilcot inquiry and into Conross's testimony in that. But it was a clear self-exoneration exercise on behalf of Conross, added to which that he actually was behind the scenes manipulating the evidence and certainly embellishing and exaggerating that evidence. And he formed part of the committee of Blair's war project against Iraq. So it's very hard to yes, of course, he then made the statement of resigning over Iraq, but not before he had been very clearly implicated.
So this is an operative, Mike. So an operative setting up a vehicle, diplomat, the independent diplomat, funded by the Foreign Office, the same Foreign Office that's funding the White Helmets, right? The same Foreign Office that's backing the moderate rebels. So you can see how the system here is constructed. So this is, but again, this project, it's a holdover from the 1.0 when people actually believed that these were moderate rebels in Syria. And now most of the public, much of the public and a lot of the media are now aware that that was a complete fabrication, that was a complete lie. So they're sitting there holding all of these old cards, Mike. And so they're finding it harder and harder to sell this scam that they've been involved in. And then you've got a £1 billion slush fund for special projects, the Conflict Stability Security Fund. That's all it is. It's a slush fund for promoting instability.
Yeah, absolutely,
in countries overseas.
And he's, this guy is a hybrid war expert. I think it was in The Guardian that he writes for The Guardian regularly. But he states in one of his articles, this work should be brought together to construct new strategies, a new paradigm. In fact, he's talking actually about targeted sanctions at this point on Syria, because he's basically saying, okay, military intervention is perhaps not going to work. And perhaps the proxy military intervention has failed because the Syrian Arab Army has basically driven them out of most of their areas of concentration. But rather than wasting money on already outdated weapons like the F-35 fighter, perhaps the Pentagon could invest a tiny part of these expenditures in a cross-service division devoted to learning about and, when appropriate, deploying these non-violent weapons for circumstances such as Syria today. So he's clearly arguing, multi-spectrum war here. He's arguing sanctions. He's arguing all manner of punishment for a nation that is resisting basically neocolonialism.
Okay, well, look, we're going to have to end this section now, Vanessa, but let me just bring this one back up on screen, which shows the $869,000 for 2016. We'll just have a look at a couple of the others. This is 2015, and so it goes on. 2015 as well, another part of that, so 300,000. So, I mean, in terms of the £1 billion a year budget, it's not a large proportion of the budget, but nonetheless, you've got to then ask, where else is this money going?
Yeah, exactly. This is the question that needs to be asked. I mean, if this is being funneled, as Patrick just made the point, this just means it's a slush fund that is basically being funneled through various organizations into the destabilization of Syria. The White Helmets is a UK Foreign Office construct, although it receives multi-million funding globally, really, but from all actors involved in the destabilization of Syria. So yeah, this is a form of funding streaming from the Conflict Stability and Security Slush Fund, which is taxpayers' money. The transparency on this fund should be absolute, and it should be absolutely be held accountable. Because if this is one organization that is receiving this money, as you said, how many others are receiving it in this way?
I'll just mention, Vanessa, while you're on, that I had put a freedom of information request into the Department for International Development and the Foreign Office about the quarterly financial statements that they receive from the White Helmets. I've had the response a couple of days ago, and unsurprisingly, following a 20 working day delay to continue trying to find some way to not give me that information, they have decided that it would be too expensive to give it to me, so they're not going to give it to me. So we've got to try other avenues. But you know, that they did acknowledge that they have the information, so that's at least one step forward. But you know, the opacity in this whole operation, and no matter which government department it is or which section of a government department it is, they do not want to publicly disclose where the money is going to, what it's being spent on. And I mean, if that isn't raising alarm bells with people by now, then I'm not sure what will.
It won't happen. It won't happen until there's a changeover of government completely, because nobody wants to take ownership of this. This is one of the biggest crimes in the 21st century, and it will bring a government down if the public truly knew the depths in which they go to.
You know, isn't this extraordinary that there isn't one mainstream media outlet that is investigating this? You know, we're working with a tiny budget, with very little, very few facilities, and yet a mainstream media outfit could have nailed this by now, or at least got a lot closer. But they're not touching it. Now, what does that say about the mainstream media? I mean, we know what it says, but you know, it's just another example of how really they're nothing. They're not a watchdog. They're a lapdog.
Yeah. Okay, Patrick, let's have a look at this then, because you noticed that the UNHCR has produced a new website.
I did. It's called Searching for Syria, and this looks like a sort of public relations exercise for the UN. And here they're featuring the one, the only, the world famous Bana of Aleppo. You know, hasn't this little girl been exploited enough for geopolitical ends? The United Nations now has taken her, and they are basically pushing her face and her image around in order to sell or to maybe protect them or create a softer landing for the UN's own sort of scandals and inadequacies in being any sort of mediator for this sort of conflict. I'm talking about the stuff coming out of the UN always implicating Russia or Syria for attacks on aid convoys or chemical weapons attacks and things like this. Here they are trying to clean up their image a little bit, but using a little 7-year-old girl. Yeah,
well, look, I went and had a look at the website, and it is an expensive website full of animation. So let's have a look at a little bit of the transitions that are involved as you watch this website. So apparently, Searching for Syria is what it's called. It's, as I say, got lots of animations on it.
So the world's looking for answers, and this is the sort of typical objective mainstream narrative. How did this happen? This horror. What, you know, how could it have come to this? And they don't ever want to really get into the causes of the war in Syria, which the mainstream media will not get into either, which is the direct actions of the US, of the UK, of France, of the NATO member states, and the Gulf Cooperation Council member states, leading by Saudi Arabia and Qatar. That's how Syria and Turkey. This is how Syria happened. These are the answers that we want, but they're not going to be given to us by the UN nor any of the members of the mainstream media, who are all complicit in sort of engineering this horrible conflict over the last 6 years.
And Vanessa, there were two things that struck me as I watched this, as I scrolled through this little thing. One was that schools apparently not being used for schools, but being used for shelter. But they don't say who the schools were sheltering. And then at the end here, they say that, of course, all the damage to farming land caused food prices to soar by as much as 900%. I don't think it was the damage to farming land that did that, Vanessa.
No. Look, I mean, what caused food costs to soar, of course, are sanctions. And we know that those sanctions have been further increased through the Caesar bill, which was basically created by Zionist lobby, by the Muslim Brotherhood, and by the Democrat Party. Those are the main drivers behind the Caesar bill that went through Congress in, I think, April of this year, which has further increased those sanctions. But going back also to the schools, of 500 schools in East Aleppo, 300 were occupied by Nusra Front as military centers, Sharia courts, prisons, execution chambers, We walked around some of those schools. We saw exactly what they had been used for. So, I mean, again, there's a huge amount of obscurantism going on here by the UNHCR, plus the fact they mention refugees. Well, they've just produced a report saying that tens of thousands of refugees are returning to Syria after the Syrian Arab Army has liberated those areas from US, EU, UK, Gulf state funded terrorist factions.
Okay, well, look, the other good news, of course, is that Mosul apparently has been liberated from ISIS, so that's a fantastic piece of news. I'm not going to get comment on this because we need to move on, but I just wanted to make the point that Michael Fallon is congratulating Prime Minister Abadi and the Iraqi forces who've been fighting on the ground with great bravery and care against a brutal opponent. But Patrick, as we heard on from a commentator speaking on BBC Radio 4 this morning, the civilian cost of this has been huge. And so all I can say is that Michael Fallon, the Secretary of State for War, absolute hypocrite because they criticised Russia and Syria for getting rid of ISIS out of eastern Aleppo because of the potential for injury and death to civilians, and yet they are applauding the Iraqi Prime Minister for doing exactly the same thing. The hypocrisy here is huge. But look, just getting back to the G20 for a second, Theresa May focusing on terrorism. Obviously, terrorism, we're being told, is being driven from what's going on in the Middle East. And it's a threat we're facing, she said. We have agreed to take action, she and the G20, in 2 specific areas. We need to ensure there are no safe spaces for terrorist financing. And we've agreed that we should halt the spread of extremist material and poisonous propaganda that's warping young minds. Well, of course, Theresa May is driving this censorship agenda because, of course, they're not actually censoring the real terrorists at all. They're really aiming to censor critics of Western policy. And the other main world leader that's pushing for this extremely hard is Malcolm Turnbull from Australia. And so he's arguing with people, Silicon Valley bosses on encryption, for example. And Turnbull then is here today to talk to Theresa May about this issue and also about global trade. And he's just arrived following the G20 via France, where he was discussing exactly the same issue of global trade with Macron. Now, at the G20, Theresa May said that trade the UK is a leading advocate for free trade and open markets, for the World Trade Organization, and for a global economy that works for everyone. And she, of course, is talking about how globalization has left some people behind, and we've got to make sure that those people aren't left behind. She said Britain has always been a great trading nation, and and as we leave the European Union, we will seize the exciting opportunities to strike deals with old friends and new partners. This is all part of her Global Britain strategy. She said she held a number of meetings with other world leaders at the G20 and was struck by their strong desire to forge ambitious new bilateral trading relationships with the UK after Brexit. And of course, Turnbull wanting to do exactly the same thing with the EU. This is something that I have argued for quite some time, that is a replacement for TTIP and TPP, which are failed as trading agreements. And they're going to replace those massive trading agreements with individual bilateral, an entire mesh of individual bilateral trading agreements. Theresa May went on to say, this is a powerful vote of confidence in British goods, British services, British economy and the British people. And we look forward to building on these conversations in the months ahead. Well, in fact, this has nothing to do with British goods, services, economy or the people. It's wholly about global governance. And particularly the aspects of global governance that the TPP and TTIP were meant to address. And here's another thing we mentioned last week, which I believe fits into the jigsaw here. This is the new business and property courts, which has been established in England and Wales, because this new body is particularly dealing with international dispute resolution. Okay, and of course, Again, looking last week, the this is according to City AM, the Lord Mayor of London. Now that's the City of London, the square mile, not London, the city. Okay, so this is City of London's Lord Mayor, Andrew Parmley, who told the judiciary at a meeting, I guess at Mansion House, that it will be the legal profession which carries the UK through Brexit and not the financial sector. So this is a pivot by the City of London under these circumstances, under the umbrella of Brexit, or under the sort of smokescreen of Brexit. He said, we cannot deny that for now there is uncertainty, but of one thing we can be certain: the preeminent position of English law, UK courts and British legal services. So they're pushing British legal services, and particularly this international dispute resolution, Patrick, because I believe that is what is going to come through the back door with these bilateral trade agreements. This was the area of TTIP and TPP that the campaigners found particularly disgusting, the international dispute resolution, and particularly the ISDS, which was there to give corporate interests apparently superiority over national governments' interests. And we're going to see that through these trade agreements. And as far as I can see, the people that were campaigning on TPP and TTIP are asleep at the wheel here. They need to be paying attention to what's going on.
If people don't think that for years before, maybe this year and last year, when TTIP and TP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, were big stories, for years, armies of corporate lawyers have been constructing the framework, the very international framework which you just described, Mike, which gives the corporations and their lawyers, and believe me, the city's right, it is about the lawyers, it is about law firms, because they're going to administer these international cross-border disputes and regulations, okay? This is about a corporate governance framework that is international, and it is like an octopus, Mike, and it will have its tentacles all around the world, and it supersedes national sovereignty. That's what TTIP and TPP were about. This is why people rejected it, and here we have that exact framework being constructed by stealth through the back door.
Thank you for that, Patrick. Thank you very much for joining us, Vanessa. That's the end of the program today. Thank you for joining us. We will be back at the same time as usual tomorrow, 1 p.m. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.